So I'm Ben Smith, and I've been working in conjunction with Leeds City College this year. I actually work at Shipley College, as you can see by the branding on there, which is a small college just in Saltaire in Bradford. And we're one of the network partners of Leeds. So I've been running an action research project from the Shipley College site of the semantics and mathematics to see if improving maths vocabulary can improve the attainment in our GCSE resit learners, 16 to 19. The college I work at, we have the sort of demographic and areas we get our students from is most of sort of inner city Bradford and sort of the surrounding areas. We run our maths alongside the vocational courses that they do. So we usually have a lot to do with their sort of vocation as well when we are teaching them. So I chose this topic then. What we did, sorry, there we go. What we did was I noticed that students are in real issues of sort of the literacy of maths questions. So they might know the maths because they would have been taught the maths, but the actual literacy and understanding the question itself seemed to be a real issue. And this became very apparent when we were doing the teacher assessed grades over the sort of COVID pandemic period, that they really weren't understanding. So we did a initial survey to see what the students themselves found the most difficult. And it came out that remembering keywords and their meanings, establishing what question is asking you to do, finishing in time and reading the questions. But those two, the establishing what question is asking you to do and remembering the keywords and their meanings, came out on top. So it supported the need to do this research straight away. So me and my action research group, what we thought originally seemed to be the case. So our sample we used 65 learners across 9 classes, and then there was 5 teachers, including myself, who were involved in collecting the data and sort of running the project. We chose the levels of entry level 3 to level 1, and we chose these levels because we noticed that they seem to have the most difficulty with the sort of literacy of maths questions. Like, it is across the board an issue, but these particular levels seem to have either quite low literacy levels or quite large gaps in knowledge when it comes to their English as well as the maths. Altogether, we completed 2 cycles over the course of the year. So we ran the interventions, we ran the 2 cycles from October 2021 until April 2022. The first cycle we split into basically 3 main parts. Or before I go over that, actually, we have the learners, just so you know. So we teach the learners twice a week for an hour and a half each session. So we have them 3 hours per week alongside their other courses that they do. So when we did these activities, we were doing it in cycle 1, we were doing it in just one of the sessions. So an hour and a half a week is when we were implementing these things. So in cycle 1 that ran from October to January, I developed a sort of a keyword match-up activity that we used over 3 weeks as a starter at the beginning of the lesson. And this is where we had selected 10 command words from the AQA sort of command word list of things that would come up in the exam, and created these match-up activities so they could match the definition to the actual word. And then in the 4th week, after we'd scored all of these match-up activities, so they've had 3 weeks of getting used to these match-up activities. And the 4th week, we gave them like a glossary sheet, a sort of bit of a cheat sheet with the answers and examples on. We then followed that up with exam-style questions. So actual either exam style or exam questions from previous tests that they've done, using the words themselves, so showing the words in plenty of different formats that they may come across. The matching activities as well, okay, we were trying with this cycle, we're trying to see if repeated exposure to these words, so if they're constantly coming into contact with them and trying to use them, looking at their definitions and then following up with exam style questions, we were seeing if we could actually improve the students' recall of the definitions themselves. So in cycle 2, we changed it a bit. So in cycle 2 that ran from February to April, we found that the paper-based activities, because these match-up activities I was doing on paper, we found that they weren't, there was a lot of things that could go wrong with them. So when we were trying to collect the data from the paper, there was lots of scribbled out answers, or as I'll show you later on, the actual match-up activities, they became very messy and quite hard to establish whether or not they got the correct answer or not. We did manage to, but it just became, there's a lot of factors that could go wrong. So we changed to a definition-based Google self-marking form. So we thought, using it online, that's going to be, take out all these issues of people getting answers, like scribbling stuff out, because they can just change them if they want to change their mind during the task. We then moved it on, again, we changed the process, moved it on to using a shared resource bank of questions. And when I say shared resource bank, it was me and the Action Research team who created a whole bank of questions together involving the keywords to use in lesson. And then we created booklets of exam style questions to check the understanding after they'd had a go at these other two things. We also, from the first cycle, changed 3 of the words. And we changed them, like, so we had a conversation as an Action Research group, and we changed them because there were words that they'd come across quite a lot all the way through their sort of educational history. And we wanted to use more math-centric words, ones that they maybe might not know. So I will go over what words were changed. So we did originally have plot, calculate, and compare as some of the 10 words. You'll see the 10 words later on, and we changed them to translate, rearrange, and expand, because we had noticed in the class when we were doing the exam style questions that, and just generally in class, that they were having more issues with these 3 words. So we changed them up. Barbell 2011 talks about 3 types of words that you can have in maths. You can have technical, specialist, and everyday. So everyday words are ones in which we can use in lots of different settings. But then we have technical and specialist, which are much more focused for whatever topic you're doing. So we wanted to make sure the words were quite specialist just for maths, the ones that they wouldn't as much come across, to ensure that they they really understand what they mean. The self-marking Google form we did then, they had definitions on them. They had a choice of 3 definitions, but we sort of made it so they could understand it. We made it so the definitions were similar for each option, but not exactly the same. Okay, there's a slight difference to each option, as you'll see later on, which means the actual, when they did choose a right answer, it was more to do with them understanding it than it not being immediately obvious. So after we'd done these booklets, the booklets we created, we got all our resources from ExamPro and Corbett Maths. Okay, so we used a lot of different sort of platforms to create these booklets, but most of the questions came from ExamPro and Corbett Maths because they've got some really good exam style questions on there, and actual old exam questions. So they were the interventions we ran. The data collection itself then, we ran in 5 stages, and this covers both cycles. So as I'd said before, we had the initial survey, which identified the need for the research. Because as we saw before, all the learners that we use, all the 65 learners, identified that actually understanding what the question is asking, or the words in it, were the issue. Then we went on to the match-up activities. And the match-up activities, I'll show you an example of now. So it's like I said, it ran over 3 weeks. And they had a different sheet each week. So the words stayed in the same order on the left, but the definitions are always mixed up. So it's not like they could learn a pattern of which ones go where. And the definitions themselves, we created in a sort of applicable sense. We didn't take the sort of dictionary definition of that term for maths. We looked at it in a way they could use it. So, for example, if we were doing simplify, we'd say use division to make the numbers as small as possible. So it's a way in which they could look at it as a definition they could use themselves, trying to put it in their terms. As you can see from this sheet, what they would do is put the numbers that correspond to the words in the left-hand column next to the definitions. And this is where it was a bit of an issue, because there was lots of crossing out and it just became very messy. So they had their scores at the bottom, but it was becoming tricky to identify which word was attached to which definition. So that's part of why we changed it. After we completed this part of the data collection, then we took a lot of data from here to see which words would they improve the most on. We then moved on to teacher reflections. And this was when we used that bank of questions that we created all together. And instead of it being like a set task that everybody's using, we collected all these resources together, and each of the teachers used it in their own terms. So they know their classes, and I knew my classes, and they know what tasks they like or what tasks work well with them. So we made sure we were using the same words, but in sort of different formats. And then the teacher, after each week, over a 3-week period, reflected on what successes the class had, what challenges they may have faced, how the format of the tasks were, like how successful they were, and whether or not we were having any sort of success with improving their understanding and sort of attainment to do with these words. After that cycle of those 3 weeks, we interviewed the teachers involved, including myself and the students themselves. And we interviewed them, asking them a range of questions. So the teachers, we asked more sort of how they found it so far. Is there anything they'd like to change? Is there anything in the future that they'd like to work on to do with this? And then the student interviews are to do with how they found it and sort of their feeling to do with maths and their success with these words altogether. And then the final Google form that we used to collect data from was a form in which, I'll just show you it now, so the next slide, in which we gave them 3 options. So we'd give them a question of, say, calculate is the example on here, 456 minus 29. And we'd give them the 3 options of them either understanding the word calculate and being able to answer a question involved in it, or understanding the word calculate, but maybe not confident in answering a question involving it, and then I don't understand the meaning of the word calculate. So there are 3 quite distinct options to help us distinguish between them knowing the word and being able to actually apply it in a situation like to a maths question. So they were the 5 ways in which we collected data. On the final form as well, what we did is we used all of the words. We also included, like so, I'll calculate there, the 3 words we'd taken out for the second cycle, just to see if we had some improvement, see if they could, even though they hadn't come across them as much, could they still have any improvement? Like, do they remember from when we did the October to January cycle? So I thought that was quite important. And that was done really to establish the helpfulness of both cycles. So have we had a long-lasting impact, or does it have to be quite, the exposure have to be quite, not that far in the past compared to when they attempt the tasks? Like the longer, we want to see if the period of time would affect it in any way. So, data analysis of the key words. When we looked at cycle 1 and we looked at all our data, and this is what we got from it basically. We found that all the words had some sort of positive impacts. There was some improvement in their recall and understanding of these words. The most improved, as we can see here, are sensible, compare, and simplify. And I'll show you, see the percentages on the right-hand side. Okay, I'll put it into context for you. So let's say sensible, the top result. So the score on the initial task we did was 21 on the match-up activities. There was 21 correct definitions identified for sensible. But then when we did the third final task, there was actually 40 correct identifications of sensible's definition, which is a 90, and we worked that out as a 90% increase on what it had been to start with. Like, so it shows that there's a real positive increase. Even the ones further down the bottom, we've got words like estimate, describe, and significant figures. It wasn't a very drastic improvement, but it was still an improvement. We didn't have any words that were less, well they didn't remember even though they had exposure to them. So there was a positive result for all of them. struggled to separate the meaning with describe. So describe came out as one that was very difficult, even when we were doing class stuff, because they found it really hard to distinguish what it was asking them to describe, which we put down to sort of the meaning in a math sense. So they'll be maybe in English or other topics, they're describing something, then they are like using adjectives to say what it is, like to say what does it look like, or multiple things. But in a math sense, it's wanting to describe a trend or a pattern. So it's to do with changing that mindset from the everyday word and making it a specialist word or a technical word. Okay, so that's where the difficulty came there. Significant figures and estimate, I think the lower scores, or we decided the lower scores, came from a difficulty with rounding altogether. Because when we're doing rounding, we have significant figures, estimate, and rounding. There's different, it's all the same skill, but used in different ways, which can be quite confusing, which sort of highlighted an area that might need some work itself language-wise, and the difference between all three parts of rounding. We amended the word list for cycle 2, as I mentioned earlier on. So you'll see that on the next slide. So that was our results, our post-data analysis, our post-intervention. This is what we came from cycle 1. In cycle 2 then, we changed some of our words to make them more math-centric, and ones that they haven't come across their entire lives, because we did notice that on paper they could do them quite well, even if it didn't show it on the match-up one. So the change of approach actually had a much greater improvement, as you can see by the percentages here. So it was much more popular with the learners. There's more control, there's less factors that could go wrong, so it was easier for us to collect the data. And I put this down to the fact that I think learners these days, on the whole, I might be generalizing, but are quite a lot more comfortable with online tasks due to having spent 2 years learning online. So I think that's something that highlighted is quite interesting, that they actually were much more happy and much more engaged with doing an online Google form than they were a match activity that I gave them in a way. So it's like a computer-based comfort. It's almost like, oh, I know this, even if this is something difficult, I know what I'm doing here. So it's sort of, I like something quite interesting there. The big surprise from this cycle with our results was the word describe, which from being one of the bottom, like least improved, suddenly became the most improved word. So there was 15 people that got described right on the initial task, and then 51 got it correct on the final task, which is a 240% increase. This surprised all of us when we were going through the data, and we've put it down to this sort of conceptualization of the learners of the word describe, like them now taking it from an everyday word and actually understanding the concept of describe in maths. So being able to go, right, well, I'm in maths, it says describe, this is what it's asking me to do. So it's shown a sort of really good improvement by them being exposed to this word. They've actually managed to focus it from the meaning in maths. The most improved words along with describe was rearrange and significant figure. Again, significant figures was one of the lower ones originally. So this shows an improvement of them seeing it in just like being able to understand what it actually means in regards of all rounding, because they've had so much exposure to it. Product, expand and translate all ranked quite low. Still quite a good improvement, but just not quite as drastic as the others. Translate and expand, they are quite specialist terms when it comes to, and product when it comes to maths. So again, it's looking at these specialist words that we might need to do more work on. So from these 2 cycles then, and we're moving on now to the staff interviews. So staff voice. So we found from interviewing the staff, which was a mixture of doing it over Zoom and face-to-face, that it had a positive impact on their teaching practice. They actually found it had a positive impact. From the teachers and myself as well, that the matching card activity was one of the most beneficial within the lesson for what they viewed themselves, like what they saw the improvement in the students came with the matching card, which we wouldn't have said originally with how comfortable they were with the online task. but there was a good impact from doing matching activities, which shows the activity itself is a good activity, but the way I presented it might not have been the greatest way because it led to a little bit of confusion and easy to make mistakes. So we decided that if we change that task, which we'll go on to later, it could have even shown even greater impact. Most improved words from the teachers is simplify and expand. That's observed. So when they were doing the tasks in lesson, that's what they observed. The students were getting correct a lot more and were understanding and being able to use, because as alongside using the tasks that we all pulled together in the lessons, we also were being very cautious of using the words a lot when we're talking to the students. So they're hearing us use them in sentences and use them in the correct way. So it sort of helping them from that sense as well. Translate and factorize, again, became quite, had the most difficulty with. These sorts of tasks as well, as the teacher said, like the teacher A, it made the teacher very aware of the students' gaps in knowledge. So they might understand some quite difficult math terms, but there might be some basic building blocks of maths missing there. So it actually turned out to be quite an effective way of highlighting knowledge gaps. And as I said before, about structuring the sentences. There was also the fact that teacher C says that there was a notable difference between normal classes and the classes taking part in this project. And that sort of highlights the amount of time. Okay, when I say we're on about time. So the need for repeated exposure to these words, basically. So the classes that weren't involved found it much harder to identify what the word meant or was used in a math sense than the students that had quite a lot of exposure to it. So as a whole, the class might not have all understood it, but there was a greater percentage in the participating classes than the non-participating classes. So it was quite interesting to find that from their perspective. We also, when we interviewed the students, which is the next slide, so we wanted to know what they thought of it all and would they like to continue with it. So we asked them, would you like your teacher to continue using the maths keyword tasks in your sessions? And most of them said, yes, I would like to do this again. Okay, they found it helpful. Students would like to continue with the intervention. Everything they said backed up what we'd found so far, that they're finding it useful, that they feel like they've improved, they've got more confidence. This is all the things that they were saying. Students found the exam style questions most useful and helpful, which I found quite interesting in itself as well. So they liked maybe some of the starter and plenary activities we were doing, but actually being able to take their knowledge and apply it to an exam question, they found the most useful and helpful, which sort of highlights the fact that as alongside knowing the definitions, then we also need to look at application as well. Feedback was, it helps with the how of the question rather than just knowing what the word means. So like I said, the application, how do I use this, sort of made them think about it. So from all this information we got, we concluded that there has been an overall improvement in the understanding of the keywords. The exam style application provided the greatest success with the keywords rather than just the interventions based on the definition. So that shows that like I said before, the application is almost more effective than just the definitions. So alongside them knowing what something means, they need to see in what sense, how is it used, and have practice that way. So to take this further, we would have to use the keyword, like the keywords, you would have to get them to understand the word and then apply it in a situation that they're going to come across. And the keyword definition was able to be recalled, but not always applied to the question. Again, it backs it up that you need that application for it to be effective. We can teach them all the words, but we need the application for it to be effective. And one thing we noticed was length of time. This should be something that would be effective if we could use it over an entire year. Okay, so when we go on to the recommendations, that's what I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so the recommendations from this and what we found, okay, is that exam style questions are the most effective. So focusing on the words themselves is a very effective way of improving their attainment, but it has to be backed up with application. It has to, they have to see how they can use it as well as knowing what it means, basically. Amend the matching activity. I spoke about this earlier to make it more student friendly. From speaking to the Action Research team and everything we've experienced over the last year, the match-up activity, if it was more of a kinesthetic thing, so where they could actually place the definitions themselves and move them around, so maybe have it a bit more interactive, that hopefully would give them be much more effective, because like the impact we saw when we said the matching activity is impactful, but the actual task wasn't that student friendly. So making it more student friendly will be a really effective way of doing it. Increase usage of keywords that students found the most difficult. And what I mean by that in the recommendation is general usage throughout the year. Not just having it say for translate, that we're like, right, we're doing transformations and focus on translate, and then we're going to leave it there. We're not going to touch it again. What we need to do is somehow implement repeated exposure to these words, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. As soon as we move on to a new topic, that word it disappears out of the memory. Okay, it doesn't become as important. So if we can use these keywords throughout the year, then it would be something that would hopefully really improve their attainment. From what we found, it does improve their understanding of it. Our sample was only 65 learners because we're quite a small college at Shipley. So if this was done over a longer period of time with a bigger sample size, we could properly test the validity of the results. So we had some very positive results. We'd be interested to see if we can extend that maybe through other levels as well as entry 3 and level 1, and to a much bigger sample size to see if we get the same answers. The keywords I selected were all from the AQA command words for that exam board. Obviously, there's different command words for different exam boards. They're all very similar, but I particularly chose AQA because that's the exam we do. So I thought it would be much more beneficial to the learners for them to look at words that they're definitely going to come across.
Ben,
okay, so
Ben, just quick heads up, we're almost done time-wise.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I'm nearly done myself.
Super.
Like I said, increase sample size, test validity, increase the size of increase the length of time and the usage throughout the year should have a very positive impact. And finally, so thank you for listening. There's my emails on there, and this is in conjunction with Shipley College and Leeds City College. This presentation will be available for you to have a look at. And if you click on this link, it will take you to a website that's been created that has all of the resources that we used and all of the information outside of this presentation if you wanted to look into this further. Thank you for listening. Well, thank you very much.